Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. I am Nick. Our guest today is the lead game designer for Paizo, the creator of the beloved role-playing game Pathfinder, owner of Minotaur Games and the new Eventide campaign setting. Please welcome award-winning game designer Jason Bulmahn to Epic Realms. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad here today. It's a little warm in Seattle, but we'll get through.
Well, that's that's good. And by the way, belated happy birthday! I know you had
Oh, hey.
you had a birthday stream not too long ago. How did that go? How was your birthday?
It went very well. We had some fun. We played some party games. We played some Jackbox, some golf with friends, and we killed some zombies and had a good time. So it was a good stream.
Awesome, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
So, when you were a kid, did you ever think that you'd be where you are today? Did you think you'd be like, "Hey, I'm going to be a game designer, or do role
No,
playing"?
no, not at all. I thought I was going to be an astronaut.
Oh yeah,
Well, at first, right? And then I went from being a small 8-year-old to being a over 6 foot tall teenager, and it quickly became apparent that that was not going to be in the cards. And then I started drawing comics and went to an art high school where I loved to draw comics and do that and use my imagination in that way, and majored in drawing and painting. And then I realized I wasn't going to make any money doing that. So I went to college and became an architect, which I actually did for several years. But throughout this, there was one thing going on in the background, which was I was a gamer, right?
right.
And I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and gaming was everywhere in the 80s, right? I went
Yeah.
to Gen Con, my first Gen Con when I was 11. And so for me, gaming has been a thing that I've been doing since I was a kid. And um as I grew up, I never stopped, right? Throughout college, I had multiple campaigns, and we changed games. We did different things, played different things, and over the years, I started to get involved with volunteering on the side, and all of a sudden, volunteering turned into freelance, and freelance turned into a job offer. So I don't know how I got here. I There are days when I look back and I was just like, that was nothing but a giant string of luck. I didn't plan for any of this. It just kind of happened.
What was your intro into role playing?
I learned to play with the old red box back in middle school, with a friend of mine who, he was GMing, I was playing, and I made a elf because that's what you were in the red box.
Right.
And my elf's name was Sir Falcon Talamir, and he died trying to rescue the cleric from the clutches of Bargle to a yellow mold covered dinner plate. That's what killed me. I grabbed a dinner plate that was described as gold, and it wasn't. It was yellow mold, and it killed my character. And I have been trying to make the perfect game experience ever since, in honor of that character.
So do you like throwing yellow molds and everything? Then it's like,
No,
let's
no,
throw a
not
yellow
really.
mold in here. Just
I, in retrospect, I'm like, that's a cheap gotcha, but it hooked me, to be honest.
yeah.
I'm a firm believer that adversity is what hooks you into role-playing games. I get the philosophy of, hey, make sure folks have a fun, easy, accessible first experience, but I also wanted to challenge them. I want them to walk away feeling like they earned success, not that they played something with kid gloves on.
Right.
I want them to feel like they earned it, and if they died, I want them to feel like they were within a hair's breadth of victory, and that maybe next time they'll get it right. I've created a lot of intro products over the years. I get some flack for how hard they are, and I'm always like, yeah, well, get better. I don't know what to tell you. I'll see
Wow.
you next time. uh and frankly, I think it's kind of worked, to be honest. I do I blamed that yellow mold covered dinner plate because
Right.
that's what did it. That's what hooked me.
We had a lot of your contemporaries on, people that have worked with Paizo and Pathfinder, Owen Casey Stevens, James
Oh,
Sutter,
sure. Yeah,
and
yeah,
they seem to bring different things to the table, as
sure.
far as what they do. What is it that, obviously, for creating stuff, like you created Pathfinder and all that, but what is your big give to when it comes to role playing and doing designs? Is it like the mathematics of it? Is it like the world setting, the storytelling? What do you think is your
I
big give?
my focus is always to try and create the kind of best possible experience at the table, and everything else serves that, right? The world is the setting in which that story is told. The mechanics are the way in which it plays out. For me, I always like to take a step back whenever I'm trying to make a decision that isn't obvious or isn't straightforward. I always try and take a step back and analyze it from the perspective of what would make for the best experience at the table. What makes for the most engaging, fun story experience for everyone who's gathered? Because ultimately, right, it's a hobby in which a whole bunch of people gather together to tell a story. The rules are the framework by which it's not just chaos.
Mm-hmm.
I was about to say like Calvin Ball, right, where it's just like make it up, anything goes. And the world gives a framework and setting for that, and the GM serves as a narrator and kind of arbiter of major plot points, but ultimately everybody is adding their creativity to this story. So everything that the game is doing should be in service to that,
Okay.
right? And don't get me wrong, my job is primarily to make rules, but making rules in service of the narrative and the structure is actually really hard.
Right.
To do it with intentionality, to do it with, yes, we know that the math is going to do X, Y, and Z, and that tells us this is the sort of game state we are creating, right? Uh, I used to joke that a big part of playing my games was, go do my math for me. But the intentionality there is that math is actually how you're telling the story. I just don't want you to think about it as math.
Right.
I've been more successful than that at sometimes than others, but you live, you learn, you kind of move forward.
Do you prefer to be this? I always ask this. Do you prefer to be a GM or a player?
I am a forever GM. I actually don't like to say I'm the forever GM. I am the eternal GM. I was here before. I will be here after. I am always telling stories. For the forever GM makes it sound like an obligation or a burden. The eternal GM is a statement of ownership.
There you go. Well, I mean, you're talking about, you know, being a job essentially. Do you feel like if you sit down to role play with friends, do you sometimes feel like that's work, or do you like that as relaxation time since that's your career?
I think it depends, right? So in the past, 4 years, I've done a fair number of gaming on streams,
Mm-hmm.
and frankly, that feels a lot more like work, because when you're gaming on a stream, you have to kind of have everything prepped in advance to a 99.8% margin. At least I feel like I have to, because I want to give a good show and it's live, and you
Right.
want to be snappy and keep things moving. You don't want to stop and open up the rule book if you don't have to.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, I have pretty good system mastery, so I generally don't have to do that. And frankly, there are now enough web resources that even if I am running a game live, I've become very good at carefully typing out a rule while question on Google while nodding and,
Right.
and getting an answer, or being able to search a database, while playing in a seamless way. But so I think when I'm streaming, that feels a lot more like work. But right now I'm running 2 playtest campaigns. It's the same campaign, just with 2 different groups, and frankly, it's a blast. It's fun. It's relaxing. It's just what I want out of gaming, right?
Yeah.
So I, I think there's a lot of folks who feel like, especially if you've been in the game business for a long enough while, and it can be very challenging work, that you've turned your hobby into a career, and sometimes that's a negative because all of a sudden it can't be your hobby anymore because even your hobby feels like work. I don't feel that way. When I'm just sitting down to play a game or play games with friends, it still just feels like fun. But I do think when I'm streaming, it's less so. It's definitely more like work when I'm streaming.
Yeah. I understand that. Do you find yourself playing more than one system in a given section when you guys are playing or when you're playing, or do you stick to whatever you're working on?
Um, I think it depends. I Most of the time I'm running whatever game it is that I'm writing.
Okay.
just to keep my head in it and to keep, I find that it's real easy to lose some of the nuance of the rules and some of the finer points if you're not actually playing it.
Hmm.
Um, but that said, even when I'm doing that, right, I like to throw in another game to play now and again, even if it's just a one shot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have dozens and dozens of RPGs that I've yet to get a chance to field on the table. And frankly, just because of the number of them and how finite time is,
Right.
honestly, most of them are never going to get more than a single playthrough or two. But I still want to do that, right? I want to see what other folks are inventing and dreaming up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really interesting, engaging game design out there, and it's actually my job to make sure I'm aware of it and cognizant of it, just so that I know what niche I think we can serve with our games, right?
Right.
I think it's important. Otherwise, you can kind of blunder and just make the same thing somebody else is making, right?
Was it difficult when you were switching? Because we're talking about different games. When you guys switched from first edition Pathfinder to second edition Pathfinder, was that a
Yeah.
difficult shift? Was that hard? How did that happen?
Oh well, for me, and I suggest I would think most of the members of the design team, the switch was gradual.
Okay.
Unlike everyone else, where it was kind of like a switch. It was like one day you were playing first, the next day you were playing second. For us, it was this slow evolution because the first thing we did when designing second edition was put together just kind of a proof of concept test. And what that was just kind of playing around with some of the core identity and what we knew we wanted to change about the game. But if we didn't have any strong opinions on it, we just left it the way it was, just so that we could kind of bootstrap a play experience as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But that meant that we were only kind of playing part of the game, and over time that became more and more and more as we replaced and changed out other systems. So for me, it was actually a very gradual shift that took 3 years
Oh wow.
to fully implement, because we started designing it 3 years before the final release.
Oh wow.
Um, and so for me, it was a lot more gradual than I suspected is was for everyone else. Um,
How much of a
but
heads up
that's
did they give you before that 3 years before you started? Was there like a heads up, or was it just like, hey guys, let's change something? Or was it just like somebody's, down the line was like,
well, I
hey,
mean,
we need to change it?
as the director of game design, I had a lot to say when that process actually spun up and when it started. So
Okay.
like the earliest steps of it, God, were like 5 years before it released, right?
Okay.
And that was just us kind of talking and listening and chatting with other folks on staff and fans, just trying to find out what folks felt like, what worked in first edition and what wasn't working, or what didn't quite sing the way we wanted it to. So a lot of that stuff started very early and was really loose. And honestly, the hard work didn't really start till about 3 years before it released, and frankly probably more like 3.5,
Okay.
where we were just putting together kind of rough tests. That way we could sit down at the table and play something that was new and different and kind of get a sense of what that felt like. um so yeah, it was a long process. And then it from that early test, then it went into what we called the vertical slice, which is a term I borrow from video game design, which is create a play experience from the beginning to the end, a complete play experience. For us,
Right.
that meant a 1 to 20 play experience space, but bare bones, right? You don't need more spells than you can cast in a day. You don't need more magic items than your characters can use. You don't need more monsters than they can fight to get from 1 to 20. That way you can just pick levels and play the game and make sure that a lot of your core assumptions were working, especially when it comes to a game that, is meant to be played over several years and might have a slow scaling grade. We knew we couldn't sit down and play a 1 to 20 campaign, but we did know that we could jump around and get a sense of whether or not the math formulas were working and giving us the play feeling we wanted. And then that turned into the beta and then the public playtest, and then here we are.
How much did that shift also affect how Starfinder was coming along, and how much work did you have on Starfinder?
Starfinder was kind of a parallel development in the early days.
Hmm.
Starfinder kind of came about, and the design team for Pathfinder put in a fair amount of work in the early days of Starfinder, because the team that was being assembled for Starfinder wasn't free from their other tasks yet, but the work had to get started. Like for example, I designed the mechanic, like that class I designed.
Right.
I also designed the early draft of the Starship combat rules, for better or worse. And so we were involved with a lot of the early class design, and a lot of some of the early game building. But there came a point where we just kind of handed it off. And what was in there was some of our early iterative work on what we would then continue to play with to make Pathfinder 2. It's not quite that cut and dry. They kind of
Right.
formed at the same point and then both took radically different directions because one had to release in a year and the other one had a full 2 more years before even the playtest.
Right.
So they informed each other. They were like siblings, but one had to go out and get a job after a year, and the other one got to spend more time at
college.
finishing school. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I get what you're saying.
I don't want it to sound like Starfinder was rushed, because it wasn't.
Right.
That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm saying is it's just a matter of one had more time because it was being iterated as an entirely brand new system where we literally pulled apart the entire game engine and put it back together.
Right.
That's not what we did with Starfinder, so that shaves plenty of time off of the process.
Right. Definitely. How does that compare to designing other kinds of games? You worked on a couple card games and stuff like that. So you're dealing with all these role-playing stuff, and then you've got these other non-role-playing type tabletop games. How does the creating of the system of those kind of compare or contrast to each other?
Yes, over the years I've made a handful of card games and some I've done some board game expressions and things like that. Little things mostly.
Yeah.
Nothing too big. I kickstarted my own real simple little game called Pirate Loot, which is a real simple take that kind of card game. I recently did
great art, by the way.
Oh yeah. The folks who worked on that were great. Dylan McConis and oh come on. Oh, I'm dying here. I'm forgetting his name. Dylan did most of the work, which is why she's coming to mind. But I also recently did a party social game called Elephant in the Room, which is just I didn't even print it. It's just POD. You have to get it POD via drive-through cards. So I've played around with a lot of games, and actually I've got like 2 or 3 other games sitting in my hard drive that I'm just trying to find the time to finish, including a entirely different role-playing game that I'm 80% done writing. I just need to find the time for the last 20%. And I think, looking at all of those, my process from a 10,000-foot view is very similar, right? I identify, whenever I'm trying to build a game, the first thing I do is identify who is this game for and what type of play experience am I trying to create. Once I've kind of got those two things, then it turns into, okay, let's build a quick rough and dirty demo of what I think the play experience should feel like, to see if the initial ideas of mechanics line up with the expectations for how it feels at the table, right? If the rules are starting to equate to the correct game experience. And that then just iterates and refines until the rules start being codified, and then that eventually translates into playtesting. And throughout all that, you probably get to a point of kind of firmness where you can start ordering art and getting other pieces in place, like layout pieces and that sort of stuff. And it all just slowly comes together, right? The process isn't very different, no matter how big the game is. I think the difference is the scope of the game will make some of those pieces take significantly longer than others, right?
Yeah.
Development and refinement on a 640-page role-playing game took years. Development and refinement on a social party game took me 3 days.
Okay.
Just because I was able to play it a bunch of times and go, oh, this works, this doesn't. We're pretty much there.
Right.
Each card has 12 words on it, so it's not like there's a lot to develop.
Yeah, you're not putting out a novel.
Yeah, as opposed to putting out something with literally 500,000 words in it. So process-wise, they're pretty similar. But the overall outlay and how the individual steps work out can be very different, right? the layout and the art on a card game can be very extensive just because it's a lot of graphic elements. Whereas frankly, once you get the page template set up for a lot of simple layouts, like if you're just doing a simple PDF, once you have the page layout, if it's 30 pages or 60 pages, you're adding time, but it's not adding a tremendous amount of time because of templating and things like that. But yeah, I don't want to short sell it because it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm trying to illustrate is that the process only changes based on what the final product is, and it adjusts and expands for that. But I think the overall process is pretty similar, at least for me. I again, right, you know, if I'm trying to create a game that is a competitive game that needs super finely tuned balance between the various actions and moves and stuff, that will make that part of it take longer. Whereas in a game like, say, Pathfinder, where the core assumption is that odds are tilted in the player's favor because they're the heroes and this is their story, and if it wasn't, it'd be a pretty sad short tale.
It's a game I want to play. I'm not the hero.
Yeah, I'm not. People have made that game. I have played it. Where it's just like, well, hey, I survived. Let's call that a win. You know, but yeah, I think overall the game design process, at least for me, feels similar.
With talking about different games, how is it? And again, we're maybe jumping subjects a little bit here, but how is it for you? You create this world or this system, and now there was a whole series of novels that were based off of it. There's card games based off of it, popular card games that were based off it, and video games. You know, we got Wrath of the Righteous that, you know, came out not too long ago. How was that for you to see all that come to life?
I mean, I'm continually surprised and amazed by some of the work that other folks do, playing around with some of the things that, you know, I've helped make. But, you know, as in all things of this size, even, you know, even in the games that I myself had a huge hand in, there's still always a lot of other people involved. And with these other projects, it's just a whole lot more people, and none of them are me. You know, so I always, you know, I'm always humbled and frankly, pretty excited to see what other people do with the stuff that I've created. There are a few things that I feel protective over, that I want to be the one to make decisions about. But I think in a biz this big, you got to let go and you got to let other folks play in the playground. And that's
Right.
especially true when you're building core system engine, right? I mean, I had a big hand in the early days of Galarian, but I haven't had a huge hand in it since because I just don't have time. I'm pretty delegated to making giant rule books and mechanics and game systems. And that doesn't leave a lot of time for deciding who the mayor is of, you know, a small town in Thuvia. You know, I sometimes I get to make those decisions, but not very often.
Is that something you wish you could do more of, or you had time to do more of?
I mean, I think that is why I do things like Eventide. It's like
Okay.
I'm separating my work and doing some of those other tasks because I do find them enriching and engaging, right? Like I've done a lot of world building over the years. But it tends to come in dribs and drabs. You know, otherwise I'm kind of spending a lot of time doing mechanical design. And there are days where I wish I could do more of it, but then, you know, I also know what I'm best at. And frankly, there are folks who are way better at world creation than I am. At least I feel that way, right? I mean, I think everybody in the game design biz feels like everyone's better at everything than they are. You know, and yeah, I mean, I think it just, you know, for me, it always comes down to a matter of managing how much time I have in the day, right? You know, I work a full-time job, and then I get done at night and I'm streaming or, you know, catching up on my favorite TV shows, or you know, playing a game or designing my own stuff.
Right.
And once you start factoring all that in, it's only X number of hours of the day, and you have to kind of decide where you're going to spend those. So right now I'm on a world building kick and I'm enjoying it.
Nice.
You know, in my spare time.
What
Because
you mentioned watching TV. What kind of shows are you watching right now?
oh well, you know, I get you got to keep up on all the Marvel shows and all the various Star Wars shows, and you know, the occasional HBO show or two, you know. So I'm really enjoying Miss Marvel right now.
Okay.
That show is fantastic, and the new season of Westworld just started. So it's been a good week for
Yeah.
fun, engaging TV shows. I thought the end of Obi-Wan Kenobi was fantastic.
I still haven't. We're so far behind on Disney Plus. We haven't
Oh,
had
okay.
it.
I will not spoil it then. Yeah, I enjoyed it. But I'm pretty easy to please.
Nice. What about
So
games? You playing video games? You're on your stream. What are
right
some of
now,
your go to keep going back to? Obviously, I've seen you playing Wrath of the Righteous
yeah,
recently.
I've been playing Wrath. I'm in chapter 5 of Wrath. No spoilers, but I'm about, I'm over 2/3 the way through, and kind of rounding the bend into the home stretch. For those of you who know the game, chapter 5 is kind of there's some hard, heavy hits that come at the beginning of chapter 5, and I'm still dealing with those. So I've been having fun with that. Me and a good friend of mine, Dan, who works for Sirenscape. He used to work for Paizo, Dan Tharp. Him and I play on Saturdays. We tend to play a game called 7 Days to Die, which is a zombie apocalypse game. And every 7 days, the zombies come for you in mass. They do a horde night where they come for you that night, and you have to build a base. So we did some of that. It's fun.
And
It's
that's what
good.
you're playing for your
Good.
birthday, right?
Yeah, we were playing a bit of that because, as I said, every 7 days, and every day in the game is about an hour of gameplay. So I don't stream 7 hours a week playing 7 days, so you don't get a horde night every week. And it happened to time out that we had a horde night right at the start of this week's stream. So we did that, and then we played party games and stuff. It was good times.
Nice. All right. So, newest Pathfinder second edition book. You just came up with it not too long ago. Book of the Dead, which you had a pretty big hand in.
I did.
And I one of my favorite, I don't want to say bad guys because they're not always bad guys, but one of my favorite things about role playing is the dead or the undead.
Yeah.
And the various things you can do with them because they're just so universal. What is it that makes this book so special?
So, for me, this is one of the first books that I've gotten cover credit on, which to get cover credit, you have to write a good percentage of it. Since the core rulebook and bestiary, right? And that's just because I'm busy, right? And frankly, I was doing a lot of Paizo streaming shows, which were eating up a tremendous amount of my time.
Yeah.
When it came time to schedule this book, I was like, yeah, I want to write a huge chunk of this book because I love the undead. They've always featured prominently in my campaigns. I think for me, undead hold a special place in the game because they are so they're such a good part of the fantasy texture, right? They fit in everywhere. They're good, omnipresent bad guys, right? It's a skeleton, right? It's a zombie, it's a ghoul, right? They're good bad guys that are fun to fight against, and there's something inherently kind of just creepy about them because if played right, you can either just throw them at the party as just kind of a generic baddie, but you can also throw them at the party as this slowly growing plague, right? Of people dying and coming back from the dead, and like they have this narrative attached to them by their very kind of nature that I find fun to play with as a GM. And you can just have you went to the crypt, there's some skeletons in there, great, fight some skeletons, who cares, it's fine. But it is real easy to kind of construct a narrative that's like, oh yeah, no, and there's a lich and it's animating this entire graveyard, and it is this entire kind of focus of the story that speaks to the nature of the creature themselves. You don't necessarily get that with too many others. So and frankly, some of the coolest monsters are undead, right? I mean, come on, liches, come on.
One of my almost always one of the main end guys in any campaigns we ever do.
I've used the lich as the bad guy in my campaign, like in like long multi-year campaigns at least 3 times.
Yeah, they're great. Is there in this particular book, what kind of different things do you have, like prestige classes or specialties or
so I mean
templates,
the
anything
book
like that?
So Book of the Dead is divided up into kind of 5 sections, and it's actually structured after there is a book in the Pathfinder in the world of Galarian called the Book of the Dead, and it was originally written in Assyrian. It was a collection of scrolls, but it was gathered together by Geb, who is this ghost wizard king. So you see, again, ghosts, they're also
Right.
awesome. And he gathered together all the scrolls and added his own annotations and his own chapters and his own bits to make the Book of the Dead. That's the fiction in the world. So when it came time for us to build the Book of the Dead, we just structured it off that premise.
Okay.
So it starts off with a collection of rules for player characters who are fighting against undead, as if they were like, these are like the early scrolls written mostly by the old clerics of Assyrian, who talk about how to preserve and fight against the undead and make sure that the dead stay dead. And then it goes from the prayers for the living, is what that chapter is called, to hymns for the dead, which is a chapter about playing dead characters.
Okay.
Right. So, the first thing didn't work. So now you are undead. Here are tools for you. And that, of course, includes things like a skeleton ancestry. So you can just be a skeleton,
Okay.
which includes some ridiculously fantastic feats. I didn't write these. I can't take credit for these, but there's some stuff in here that is absolutely perfect. Like the ability to, when you get critically hit, just collapse into a pile of bones.
Nice.
And kind of play dead and be like, nope, oh, you killed me. Like, I mean, come on, play dead. Like, you can literally just scatter yourself on the ground and pretend like you're not alive. There's some great stuff in there, and a lot of that, like, so I wrote the skeleton stuff in the bestiary as well, right? You know, the ability for a skeleton to pull off its head and throw it at you, that's me, because I find that stuff hilarious. And so that you get a whole chapter of stuff like that. You got rules on archetypes on how to play a lich, vampire, all that sort of stuff. And from there it goes into there's a massive chapter that is just a bestiary. That's the Grim Crypt. And that is just packed full of undead creatures. It's fully half the book is just more undead creatures. And there's stuff in there in addition to kind of new creatures. There's new material for existing undead as well. So I wrote more skeleton stuff and more zombie stuff and more lich stuff, because those are the things I really love.
Nice.
So I wrote a whole bunch of that stuff. And then from there, we get into some of the Lands of the Dead, which talks about the various places in Galarian that are controlled or infested with undead. So naturally, we talk about Geb, we talk about the Gravelands. We go all around the world and talk about the places that are filled with the undead. And then the last bit of it is an adventure, which is unusual for us. We normally don't put giant adventures in the back of these books, but for this, we decided to give it a try. Dark Archives features small adventures, but this is a full, big, meaty adventure. It's 30-some pages that I wrote to kind of be like, you want to experience the undead, I'm going to give you that adventure experience. Nice. So I don't want to give too many spoilers, but
so what you're saying is go get the damn book.
Yeah, I'm saying go play it because I want to hear stories from the tables of people who make that journey, because it is a roller coaster.
How many of the big campaign adventures have you had a hand in? Like Wrath of the Righteous and stuff like that.
So I haven't written much in the way of adventure paths recently, to be honest. I wrote back when we were doing Dungeon and Dragon magazine. I wrote in an installment of Age of Worms. I wrote an installment of the Isle of Dread adventure path. And I did write an installment for Second Darkness, but I haven't written one since. Instead, most of my adventure writing has been focused on either standalones to start the new editions of the game or adventures in the beginner box. I am actually, the thing I'm doing right now is actually writing a gigantic introductory adventure for my new setting, Eventide.
Well, let's talk about Eventide.
Sure.
So that's a Patreon item, right? Which they can find on patreon.com/Jason Bulmahn or minotaurgames.com, right?
Yeah, on minotaurgames.com/Eventide will take you to the landing page. So this is a setting that I've been actually working on for several years, but it just kind of was living in my hard drive, and it's taken a couple forms over the years, but eventually I realized that it wanted to be its own standalone setting, and the origin of this was right around the start of our internal design of Pathfinder 2.
Okay.
And when it first started, it was first edition, just an adventure. It was just an idea for an adventure. But as I was building the adventure, I realized I needed all this world lore and stuff to make the adventure work, right? And I couldn't set it in Galarian because at the time Galarian wasn't an open thing that I could play with, at least not in a third party sense, right? Doing it on my own. And as I started building up the world, I realized, hey, I've really got something here. And second edition was coming along as well. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to design it specifically to work, taking advantage of everything in second edition. But even then, second edition came out and I still wasn't ready to do anything with it. So, then the pandemic hit and we've all been sitting in
Right.
our houses for 2 years. And eventually I was like, you know what? I need a way that allows me to get this out there in pieces and build it as people are engaging with it. That way they can take part in directing it and see it as it grows. So it's not just a campaign, it's an experience as well,
Right.
about seeing a campaign actually grow from scratch from someone who's done it several times. And so Eventide is this world that I've built for second edition. I'm supporting it through Patreon. Eventually there'll be PDFs and stuff that go on sale, right? So if Patreon isn't your thing, eventually you'll be able to buy bits and pieces of it. But for those who are on the Patreon, right, you can get access to all of the world documentation right now, which is some 50,000-60,000 words worth of content that I've built into minotaurgames.com. So once you support the Patreon, it unlocks a whole wing of the website where all this material is located. So you can learn all about the continents, the gods, the everything from the days of the week to historical events and the main continent, then zooming into the valley where the first major city is, then zooming into the city, giving great detail about that. And then the big thing that's coming out right now is the first introductory adventure. So that's what my focus is on right now, is building this introductory adventure to teach everyone about the world and stuff. So the first 2 parts of that adventure are out now. The second one dropped just 2 days ago. So yeah, it's fun. It's exciting for me. It's a great way to engage with folks in the world building process, because I do weekly streams, chatting with folks, talking about what's coming up, talking about the playtest. I mentioned I was doing 2 playtest campaigns.
Yeah.
I am playtesting the adventure.
Okay.
And so I'm running just some friends through it. I'm not streaming it or anything. I'm just sitting down with some friends and having a good time. But I'm learning a lot about it and making adjustments to the story and making it a better, tighter tale. And I'm really excited about what we've put together so far. The first adventure is a riot. It's a lot of fun.
And this might come off as strange, but is this a solo just you, or do you have like a small team of people like editors or anything like that working with it as well?
Well, I'll say this right now, it's primarily me. I'm the one doing the cartography, the writing, the layout, and the base editing. But before any of it goes into a final PDF for sale, I'm currently in negotiations with both an editor and a developer to give these things passes, because listen, I'm a decent writer, but every single writer I know becomes better with an editor.
Yeah.
So I really want to make sure I got a good editor on staff to kind of help with this. I'm also engaging with some artists, to get some, frankly, some high quality, full color pieces to fill these things out. Art is really expensive though, and that's why, frankly, why I'm doing the Patreon. Because if I were to try and foot the bill for the art for something like this, a 64-page PDF that is full color art could easily cost 10 grand in art.
That's ridiculous.
That's a big investment. That's a big risky investment. But Patreon helps fund that stuff and makes it far more possible and lets me kind of leap forward to have enough funds to get art to make it look more professional, that hopefully draws more people to it. Right. It's a gamble, but
And is there a plan to do any other kind of crowdfunding stuff, like a Kickstarter or GoFundMe as well? Or is that going to be completely just Patreon?
Well, so what I'm trying to get to right now is get to the point where I'm releasing PDFs on sites like DriveThru and stuff like that. It's a nice high quality PDF. And my thought is, once I've got a handful of those and they're of the right size and right specifications, I'll gather them together as a book and do a Kickstarter, right? I've had enough experience with those, either as the person running it or as someone on the side, to know that the best way for me to have success at as a Kickstarter is to have the thing done and ready to go, and I'm just using the Kickstarter to pay for the printing and to determine how many copies to make. I think right now that is one of the big challenges in the game industry, is it's hard to properly gauge how big your audience actually is. And one of the big advantages to crowdfunding is just being able to, make the right number of a thing. So that's what I'm excited to do about Eventide. Eventide's a fun little world. It's a world with one central conceit, and that conceit is that magic is dying.
Okay.
And as a result, that has a lot of knock-on effects in the world, right? There was this cataclysmic event that happened 800 years ago, where kind of a storm of darkness and shadow covered the planet for 3 whole weeks, and everybody thought it was the end of the world, right?
Right.
Order broke down, things went crazy, but after 3 weeks, it just kind of ended, and life returned to normal. But something was different, and from that point onward, magic started becoming less and less reliable, and primal magic disappeared from the world entirely, taking with it druids. There are no druids in Eventide. And gnomes vanished from the world entirely. And over the centuries, dwarves started returning back to beneath the earth for some reason. They have this ancestral longing, but those who go below never come back. And the elves, the elven birth rate just crashed. So they've had fewer and fewer elves. So there's fewer and fewer elves in the world. And throughout all this, humans are thriving, goblins are thriving, and there are, for everything that's been taken away, I've added new things. So there's a new class called the Penumbrist, which I'm pretty excited about, a new class for P2 that I designed. And there's a new ancestry as well called Gloamlings. And it's a world that is going through some changes, and there's some pretty bad things happening, and your heroes are the ones who start to get wind of it.
Okay.
And what they do with that, what your group does with that, is up to you. But over time, you can kind of get drawn deeper into this mystery and what is actually happening, and maybe even find a way to stop it.
So do you know, for people that have played Pathfinder, the stories, is the backstory of what happened, is that something where you know what happened, or is it something where it's like, I've got this on the side, that's the story, and then we'll let the players decide for their own campaigns, kind of like the Eridan stuff or anything like that?
So I will say this. I think I've played and seen enough kind of narrative structures where it's like, don't worry, we have a plan, or don't worry, there's a thing here, and then there wasn't.
Right.
But and that's not to say that's the same thing as Eridan, just being left intentionally unsaid. No one ever said, yes, we're going to tell you. And from the very beginning, it was like, we're not going to tell you.
Right.
And you can decide that if you want. This is different. This is, I know what that story is.
Okay.
And frankly, that story is the story of this world that I'm trying to tell. And once it's told, I'll probably be done. Okay. Right. That doesn't mean there might not be something else to do with it later, but I do think I'm trying to tell one large cohesive story, because I'm a big believer in building stories and beats, and understanding, the ebb and flow of how to make a good story. And part of that is building this world in a way that I can control how some of that comes out. So, like, for example, right now in the player's guide, you can learn some of the basics about what's going on, or at least what people think is going on.
All right.
But it says specifically in the player's guide, and I mean this very literally, that some of those things that are in there are not true, because it's just what people think is happening.
Okay.
Over time, those things will become either clarified or retconned or changed based on things that folks learn or knowledge that folks get, including the GMs. The GMs are kept in the dark as well about some of these things right now, because I don't, frankly, want to give everything away right away. Right. But I also want to, make sure I do some of these concepts, kind of give them their right moment of gravity and weight, because there is some really bad stuff happening. And but most people are going about their daily lives because people are people, right? It's like, oh, there's no more wizards in every town. Okay, how was the crops this year, right? They don't care that there's no wizard.
Yeah. How does that affect? So you mentioned that, like, keeping gems in the dark or whatever on it. How is there a plan in place for, say somebody runs an adventure and they're
Sure.
like, I got this great idea for whatever,
Yeah.
and then it turns out what they thought was kind of what was happening turns out to not be right. Will
Sure.
there be an out for them to go back and change their own narrative?
I think one of the great things about this is that because it's such a large phenomenon, right? It's not just one little thing. That if folks in one area think that they've got the solution and know what it is, it's pretty easy to be like, yeah, they were wrong, right? You thought you had come to the solution. All of this scholars' work and all this stuff led you in this one direction, but ultimately it ended up being flawed, and it's not. It's not true, because there have been a lot of theories over the years. That said, what the central conceit is pretty obvious, which makes it like in its scope, right?
Okay.
It's something to do with the nature of magic. So as long as you don't make definitive statements about what is actually happening, you'll be able to steer clear of it,
Okay.
right? Because it's obvious that's what the scope is. It has a lot of knock-on effects, like, frankly, the changes to various ancestries and things like that. The fact that like teleportation magic doesn't work as well anymore, that summon spells are kind of erratic, and sometimes the creatures don't go home. And once the spell ends, they are then uncontrolled, and usually pretty angry. The fact that there used to be a pantheon of 30 some gods, but now they're down to 5. Like all of these things are all tied together because it is one large narrative that's coming together.
Right.
So right now, the introductory adventure is there to kind of give you a fun story. It's called Wolfran's Fate, and it's set in the town of Wormbone, which is a town in the north of the continent of Ulnir. And Wormbone is a free state, and it's so named because in the center of town there is a tower with a dragon skeleton draped over it. This dragon came to town 300 years ago, burned down a bunch of things, but before anyone could kill it, it landed atop this tower, started tearing apart the tower, let out a mournful howl, and then just died. And no one knows why. They didn't hit it, they didn't do anything to it, it just died. And its skeleton petrified. And the skeleton is blocking the door of this crumbled tower, so no one's been able to go inside. And the tower belonged to a wizard named Wolfran.
Okay.
And the adventure is called Wolfran's Fate because 300 years later, the wing suddenly collapses, allowing folks to go inside again. So it's been 300 years and you're going into an old collapsed wizard's tower. Good luck.
I like it.
And that's the start of the adventure, right? Is that you are drawn together because the town is like, we need adventurers to go in here because this is crazy and we're not sending the guards in there.
Right.
Right. Because they in Eventide, folks view adventurers as kind of wild cards, right? It's like, got to be careful around them. They're unhinged. They're willing to go risk their lives for some gold.
Right.
That's dangerous. So the PCs get to go in first, along with some other groups, and it's a fun time. So that's the start of it, and that is the first step into a much larger story and a much larger mystery.
Well, that's exciting. That's really awesome. And for the people listening, again, patreon.com/Jason Bulmahn, BULMAHN, or minotaurgames.com/Eventide to check that out. And I'm sure that we have some people that are listening and are watching that are going to try and check that out, because we have some diehard role-playing fanatics that are amongst us.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's a game built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If you're playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it has all the hooks and all the pieces, right? It plays specifically with the way magic works in Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Okay.
It talks to the rules. And
is it something that can be played with other systems based on if you just take the story?
I think you could. You might have to make some declarative statements about how some things work in those other worlds that it doesn't currently assume, but I think you could make it work. There'd be more legwork, but it's just like anything, right?
Yeah, any system you could just sit down and change it up. Awesome. They can also find you on Twitch, twitch.tv/Jason Bulmahn. Man, can't talk. So you can find you on Twitch there, playing games and just hanging out and having a good time. You're also on Twitter.
I stream every Tuesday at around 8 p.m. Pacific time, and I stream on Saturdays 4 to 8 Pacific time.
All right, there you go. And you're on Twitter at Jason Bulmahn.
Yep.
And you do anything else? Instagram, Facebook, stuff like that?
Yeah, I have a fan page on Facebook that I keep up. It's a lot of the same content on Twitter. So if you're on one, you generally get both. Sometimes content's better on one or the other.
Yeah.
But that is also facebook.com/Jason Bulmahn. I have my own YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jason Bulmahn. You're seeing a pattern here.
Everywhere.
if
Everywhere.
you if you
I
can
wish I was
remember
that
where
lucky.
the H goes, you can find me.
Awesome. Awesome. And a reminder to all of our viewers and listeners, this Saturday at 8:30 p.m. Central Time, we're going to be doing our next episode of the Game Masters Workshop. It's where we help you learn to run games, roleplay, or get better at roleplay. Our guests on the show, returning D&D author and game master for the Dungeon Scrawlers on Twitch, Eric Scott DeBee, will be joining us. Also, you might know him from Viva La Dirt League's D&D play on YouTube. Also, right on Twitch, Game Master Robert Hartley was going to be joining us. And the main GM from Twitch's Roleplaying, Rolling Together, Chris, will be joining us as well. This is our Twitch edition of the Game Masters Workshop. So make sure to join us for that. July 11th, we're going to be joined by Pinnacle Games lead designer John Goff. He's worked for Deadlands, Savage Worlds, GURPS, and so much more. He's an awesome guy. I can't wait to chat with him about all the things. I'm a big old school Deadlands fan myself. I don't know about you,
Me
Jason,
too.
but
Me
old school
too.
Deadlands with the chips, it was so
with the
unique.
poker deck and the bag of poker chips. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, love it, love it. Also, we won't be doing a episode, and if we do, it'll be a special Gen Con edition episode on the 25th. So don't be expecting a podcast for the 25th. But August 8th, we're going to be joined by one of the most prolific D&D authors of all time. He's created a long list of many, many loved characters such as Dris Duerden, Brunor, Catti-brie, Artemis, Jaraxel, and more. R.A. Salvatore will be joining us August 8th. So,
Nice.
like, subscribe, rate, and review, all of that crazy stuff. Make sure to do that to help us and to help our guests. So, we will be doing a live stream Q&A here just in a few bits for the people that are live. So, for the podcast, I'd like to thank Jason for joining us. I appreciate you being here. And I'd like to thank everybody else for staying with us and listening to Epic Realms.